So it costs about $10,000 an hour, roughly, in raw ingredients, wages, and marketing spend just to keep one single bottle formula in continuous global production. A formula that hasn't fundamentally changed since 1921. One bottle of Chanel No. 5 is sold somewhere on Earth every 30 seconds, and that one product alone has generated something in the range of tens of billions of dollars over the last century. Now, when you hear a number like that, your brain probably jumps straight to Coco Chanel. The visionary, the tweed suits, maybe Marilyn Monroe famously saying that's all she wears to bed, right? That's the story you expect. But here's the twist. The real reason Chanel No. 5 still exists, the real reason it survived a world war, a hostile takeover attempt, and decades of legal warfare has almost nothing to do with Coco Chanel's genius alone. It has everything to do with two brothers most people have never heard of, a Jewish perfume dynasty from bourgeois, an aviation industrialist who quietly saved their fortune, and a Nazi law that Chanel herself tried to weaponize against her own business partners. So buckle in, because today we're getting into the strange, uncomfortable, absolutely fascinating story of the secret deal that saved Chanel No. 5. Let's go back to 1920. Coco Chanel is already a known name in Parisian fashion. But fashion alone doesn't make you rich, not in the way perfume can. She's a woman running a couture house in a business world that simply does not let women hold real capital or credit the way men do. She has talent, she has a name, but she doesn't have the kind of money it takes to mass produce and mass market a fragrance. Meanwhile, France in the early 1920s is still digging itself out of the wreckage of the First World War. Inflation is biting, industry is scrambling to rebuild, and the perfume business itself is dominated by houses with old money and old land, families who inherited their position rather than built it. Chanel has none of that inherited safety net. She's an outsider, an orphan turned designer with a chip on her shoulder, and she knows that if she wants to compete with the giants, she needs something no one has ever quite done before. That vulnerability, that lack of capital, is what's about to force her into a bet that will define the rest of her life. That bet is Chanel No. 5 itself, and here's why it was so radical. She hires a perfumer named Ernest Beau, a Russian-born chemist who'd fled the Bolshevik Revolution, and he hands her a set of 10 sample vials, numbered 1 through 5 and 20 through 24. Legend has it his assistant accidentally overdosed one sample with a synthetic compound called aldehydes. Way more than anyone had ever used in a perfume before. Now, the old way of making perfume was simple. You used natural extracts, jasmine, rose, and the scent smelled roughly like what it was made from. Aldehydes don't smell like anything natural at all. They smell like something entirely new, almost abstract, like champagne bubbles or clean linen. Chanel picks sample No. 5, and just like that, she's not selling a flower in a bottle anymore. She's selling an invented sensation, something manufactured rather than harvested. That's the old world versus new world shift here. Perfume used to be about capturing nature, and Chanel No. 5 was about engineering an entirely artificial idea of luxury, but inventing the scent was the easy part, believe it or not. The hard part was money, and that's where our parallel thread comes in. Two brothers named Pierre and Paul Wertheimer. They run a company called Bourjois, a well-established French cosmetics house, and in 1924, they strike a deal with Chanel that will haunt her for the rest of her life. They form a new company, Parfums Chanel, and the split goes like this. The Wertheimers take 70% in exchange for fully financing the production, marketing, and worldwide distribution. A department store magnate named Théophile Bader, founder of Galeries Lafayette, who'd actually introduced Chanel to the brothers in the first place, takes 20%. And Chanel, she gets just 10% in exchange for letting them use her name. She's the face, the myth, the legend, but she owns barely a sliver of the business built on her own creation. And I mean, can you imagine spending decades watching other people get rich off your name while you're stuck with a tenth of the pie? And by the way, if you're enjoying this kind of deep dive into the hidden business history behind the brands you actually recognize, go ahead and hit subscribe. I'm trying to get this channel to its next milestone, and stories like this one are exactly what we do here every week. Anyway, back to the Wertheimers, because their bet on Chanel No. 5 was about to pay off in a way nobody could have predicted. Let's put some real numbers on this. By the 1930s, Chanel No. 5 alone is reportedly generating something like 80% of the entire profit for the House of Chanel. We're talking about a perfume sold in a plain, rectangular bottle nobody had ever seen before, becoming more financially important than the actual couture clothing line it was named after. Fast forward to today, and Chanel as a whole pulls in something like $19 billion a year in revenue. That's roughly in the same neighborhood as companies like Netflix. The Wertheimer family, now controlled by grandsons Alain and Gerard, is worth somewhere around $40 billion each, making them two of the richest people on the planet, richer than most Hollywood A-listers combined. One rare vintage bottle of Chanel No. 5 has sold at auction for tens of thousands of dollars, all of that tracing back to a 10% handshake deal signed in a Paris office in 1924. So how did the money actually work? Here's the mechanism, and it's honestly kind of genius. The Wertheimers realized something that's basically the influencer marketing playbook of the 20th century. The actual liquid inside the bottle costs almost nothing to produce. Jasmine and May rose from the fields around Grasse in the south of France. A touch of synthetic aldehyde, some alcohol, pennies on the dollar. What you're really paying for is the packaging, the mystique, the name Chanel stamped on the front. It's basically the razor and blades model, except here the razor is the brand story, and the blade is an endlessly repeatable, cheap-to-manufacture product. They poured money into department store placement, into advertising that sold a fantasy of Parisian sophistication rather than a chemical formula, and that's the exact model every modern celebrity fragrance and designer cologne still copies today. From there, the idea spreads everywhere. American department stores get exclusive early access. Other French houses start licensing their names to standalone perfume companies the same way Chanel did, which is honestly how most luxury fragrance still works today. Dior, Guerlain, Lanvin, they all eventually follow variations of this licensing playbook. Chanel No. 5 becomes shorthand worldwide for French luxury itself, and the aldehyde formula becomes an entire genre of perfumery that other chemists spend decades trying to imitate. But then comes the crisis, and it's not a scandal about counterfeits or bad sales. It's a war. It's 1940, the Nazis occupy Paris, and Vichy France enacts what are called Aryanization laws, seizing Jewish-owned businesses and property. Pierre and Paul Wertheimer are Jewish, and Pierre, sensing exactly what's coming, flees to New York just before the occupation. But here's the crucial move nobody saw coming. Right before he leaves, he quietly transfers his shares in Parfum Chanel to a non-Jewish friend, an aviation industrialist named Félix Amiot, essentially parking the ownership somewhere the Nazis couldn't legally touch it. Chanel, meanwhile, sees her opening. In May of 1941, she writes directly to German officials, arguing that because her partners are Jewish, she has the right under Aryanization law to reclaim full sole ownership of the company that bears her own name. It's a stunning move, using the machinery of Nazi occupation to try to seize back what she'd resented giving up 17 years earlier. But it fails, because Amiot already legally holds the shares, and there's simply nothing left for her to Aryanize. Today, more than a century after that original 1924 deal, Chanel remains entirely privately held by the Wertheimer family. No public stock, no shareholders to answer to, which is almost unheard of for a company this size. Alain Wertheimer chairs the fashion side. His brother Gerard runs the watch division, and current artistic director Mathieu Blasi, who took over in late 2024 after decades under Karl Lagerfeld, and then Virginie Viard, is now steering the brand's runway identity, while No. 5 quietly keeps generating the cash that funds everything else. Olivier Polge, son of a previous in-house perfumer, still oversees the fragrance formula today, keeping that original aldehyde recipe alive. Now look, this video focused a lot on the glamour and the business genius here, but it's important we talk about the uncomfortable parts of this history too. Chanel's wartime attempt to exploit Aryanization law against her own Jewish business partners is a matter of documented historical record, not speculation. She used the machinery of Nazi occupation for personal financial gain. Separately, the jasmine and rose that give Chanel No. 5 its signature scent are hand-picked by seasonal laborers in the fields around Grasse, work that for generations was underpaid and physically grueling, even as the finished bottle sold for a luxury price point most pickers could never afford themselves. And the official Chanel origin story has historically centered almost entirely on Coco Chanel's personal genius, while the actual chemist who built the formula, Ernest Beau, and the financiers who built the empire, the Wertheimer brothers, were for decades pushed to the margins of the brand's own mythology. At the end of the day, this whole story boils down to one simple truth. Scent has never really been a business of liquid. It's always been a business of illusion, selling not what's in the bottle, but the story wrapped around it. So here's the question I'll leave you with. When you buy that bottle, are you actually buying the scent, or are you buying the myth?